Today, we are diving into a topic that impacts workplaces and life everywhere, and that is emotional intelligence. You've probably heard this term before, but in this episode, we're going to be breaking down exactly how it impacts the way we lead, the way we collaborate with others, and the way we navigate challenges with relationships. I am thrilled to be joined today by my dear friend, Dr. Marisol Weymouth. Mindy is an expert in emotional intelligence, and she's going to break it down for us in practical, impactful, and actionable ways. Whether you're a leader who wants to create stronger team dynamics, a professional navigating workplace culture, or just someone who wants to improve how they connect with others, this episode is for you. Let's dive in. I am so excited to have a guest today who is also who I call my business BFF, Mindy Weymouth. We both own small businesses in San Antonio, and after getting to know her, I realized that the wealth of knowledge that she brings is something I want my guests to hear. So with that, welcome, Mindy. Thank you for joining the podcast today.
Hi, Mindy. Thanks for having me today. What an honor to be here and to share and partake in sharing about emotional intelligence today.
Yes, I'm so glad to have you. So start out with, Mindy, do you want to just tell us about your background and your business and what led you to be an expert in emotional intelligence?
Sure. So I'm born and raised in San Antonio. I'm a Latina first generation, grew up here in San Antonio with, my parents. They were entrepreneurs. And so, growing up earlier in my life, it was more about survival mode. After getting mentors and people around me that really saw something that I didn't see in myself, I think they started to open up my mind to the possibilities and really made me curious and start to explore. And now I'm in a phase, my third part of my life, where I call it my sharing phase. Now that I've felt like I've thrived through failures and successes, now I can share with others my businesses, People Whisper Solutions. And I really focus on helping organizations, especially the people, right, navigate through leadership development. How are they showing up, helping them really navigate through their different environments. Secondly, strategy execution, how to translate organizations' strategy into actionable, measurable ways of executing. And then lastly is change management. How are we bringing people along the journey of change, whether it be either IT or any kind of change in an organization or in life for that matter. So really the underlying current is helping people grow and develop through all these different changes.
I love that. And one of the things that is so impressive about you, Mindy, is that your deep work in studying leadership. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
I had this thirst of knowledge for pursuing my PhD, something I would have never contemplated or even thought about in the past. I didn't even know it existed, to be honest with you. But I started to explore and be curious, and leadership really spoke to me. And so I did my research and I pursued my PhD in leadership, and I absolutely love the 4 years of it. They teach us 13 theories. One of the theories is emotional intelligence, and that was my favorite. And so that really spoke to me about how are we showing up as leaders. And so that's how it all started. I was really intrigued and really helped me catapult my growth, reflection again. What am I doing differently now to be more effective and showing up to be more impactful with others and in the work that I do?
I love that. And I feel like I learn about emotional intelligence by observing you and just being around the way that you carry yourself as a business owner and a leader. So for people who have maybe heard about emotional intelligence, but not really grasped what it meant to them, can you give us a layman's definition of emotional intelligence? And then we're going to dive deep into how it plays out in the workplace.
Absolutely. Love this question because it's a very common question that I get. Emotional intelligence can be difficult to understand. So I'm going to describe it in two pieces. It's really about how you are showing up. And in two pieces, one of them is you're showing up based on your emotions, being aware of how you're feeling, and then how you're projecting. How are you showing up based on those emotions? And so being cognizant of self-awareness and then self-regulation. So that's one piece of it. The second piece of it is social aspect. How are you observing, hearing, taking all the cues in the environment that you're in, and then adapting appropriately to that environment? So both of them, it's about how you're showing up based on your thoughts And then this is based on your environment.
And we're going to dive deep, like I said, into how that affects leaders. But I also want us to talk about how it's going to affect job seekers too, because I feel like in both realms, it's so applicable. My podcast is called The People Success Circle because I truly believe that every element of what we do for people, whether it's hiring, giving feedback, performance reviews, terminating, any part of it is all part of a loop. And if we do things well, then that helps the business thrive and helps individuals feel good about their career. So when I think about emotional intelligence and where that falls into the circle, I feel like it bleeds into all of the areas. It's like the basis for showing up. And so I'm excited to have you talk to us about how that shows up. So Madi, you've built a career around helping people develop their emotional intelligence, and you've built your company around it too. So what first sparked your interest in...
Great question, Mindy. So, when I first heard emotional intelligence, I had read a lot about it. But I think, at least for me, I thought I understood what it was. I really, really did. But once I started to do more research and with my PhD and the theory, I started to realize that it's a lot deeper and broader than what I thought it was. This particular emotional intelligence has been transformational for my life, not only in my personal aspect of my career, so much so that it's a daily practice. I'm watching myself and watching my emotions to make sure I don't allow it to take over me, the way my day's going to turn out. So it's really a choice and a practice that I have to do every single day. So I still practice it to this day, Mindy. It's not only about getting there, but it's about sustaining the muscle. It's like going to the gym. If you don't practice it, it can go away.
So emotional intelligence is not always fully understood. How can you define it for us in a way that's practical for everyday life?
So one book that I've read, it's called Thinking Fast and Slow by Dr. Kahneman. He passed away last spring, I think at the age of 90, may he rest in peace. But one of the major concepts, he talks about thinking fast and slow. And what it means is we have one brain, but it has two functions. The function of fast brain is we're reactive, defensive, or fight or flight. And we need it because it keeps us safe, right? We need the fight or flight. We also have slow brain, which is system 2. It's about our cognitive thinking, making sure that we're thoughtful. It takes a little more time. How it compares to emotional intelligence is that when we react based on our emotions, we're using our fast brain. And there's maybe not a lot of logic going on there. And so that's why the practice is pause so that we can activate our slow brain. And really, that's emotional intelligence. Let me pause to make sure I'm regulating my emotions. Let me pause to make sure I'm observing the room before I react or show up or respond. So it really helps that kind of thinking, on a daily basis in my fast brain or slow brain. And we want to activate our slow brain more than our fast brain. We want to preserve our fast brain for truly when we're in danger, we need to protect ourselves or fight or flight. So the more we practice our slow brain, which means pausing, which means meditation, taking deep breaths, going for a walk, these strategies pay dividends in making sure that our slow brain is active. And the second thing I'll say in today's society is with social media, gaming, all this constant, triggering of dopamine hits, it's really overstimulating our fast brain. So that's why people in today's society, we get defensive. There's a lot of road rage. We're easily triggered, overcondition our fast brain. So we need to slow down, disconnect, take our peace back, go for walks so that we can activate our slow brain so we can be present and manage our emotions well.
I love that. And as you're saying it, I'm thinking about being a mother of 2 teen boys who do love their games, and also me, overusing my phone and social media. And so I love the image of using more of your slow brain and the ways to get there. And I will also say one of my podcast guests is Marcy, who did a episode for us on meditation and actually more so mindfulness in the workplace, mindfulness.
Really being more present so that we're able to connect and being mindful of who we're connecting with and enriching our relationships with people.
And that's going to take us into talking about emotional intelligence in the workplace, because this is something that's so important for the individual contributor in a company, but for leadership as well, to make sure that they're using emotional intelligence. So let's dive into some of that. So Madi, many workplaces struggle with employee retention, engagement, and well-being. How can leaders use the tool of emotional intelligence to help increase engagement and provide a better employee experience?
Great question. I'll answer it both from an organizational perspective and from a leader perspective, and actually a third, follower perspective. My research was around emotional intelligence from a follower perspective. Organizations have the opportunity to invest in developing emotional intelligence, not only for their leaders, but for their followers. Their leaders, because as I mentioned, the leaders have a big responsibility over a lot of followers, and how they show up matters in terms of engagement, how they're performing, that people feel valued. And when people feel valued and a sense of belonging, not only they're going to perform, they're going to give you 200%. If we invest emotional intelligence training in our individual contributors, they are more than likely going to still perform no matter how the maturity of their leader is.
Right.
If we invest in this, our followers will then show up to the best that they can, no matter where they are, where their leader is. If their leader happens to be mature on top of that, it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
But I think investing in the follower perspective in their development, oh my gosh, that can pay even more dividends. So that's kind of the research takeaway I have. That's how much it plays into effectiveness, employee engagement, performance, and really helping organizations advance their missions, because you're bringing people along because of the investment that you're making.
Madi, you work very closely with organizations, helping them navigate leadership challenges as well as change management. When you think about that, how does emotional intelligence play into the changes that an organization and leaders could be leading?
We have to understand where are they in their journey, and
Right.
then be able to understand their appetite, their change saturation, so that we can meet them where they're at first, versus assuming they should be here. And so it's building relationships with them first, so that they know, we need to know where you're at so that we can help you then move the needle incrementally. I need to be listening and caring so that I understand where they're at and meet them where they're at. And that takes time. We have to invest in those relationships to be effective over time.
Having that strength of being emotionally intelligent can just help carry you so far as the leader, so that you're empathetic and listening, and also just really understanding where your team is. How can leaders use trust within their teams and across the organization to make sure that they're showing up in the right way?
Great question. So I have this framework that I call the work to be done. And that particular framework focuses on two perspectives: the leadership, how we're showing up, and then what systems do we have in place so that we can navigate together. And the reason this was important, because leadership is defined as being able to inspire, motivate, guide individuals for a common goal, and to foster a thriving environment where people feel psychologically safe to, be themselves, but also perform. The systems part of it is around having structures in place. As you grow as an organization, the bigger you are, the more structure and systems you need in place. So for example, if we lived in a small town, many of us have driven through a very small town where there's only one stop line or one stop sign. And the reason why is because there's no need for all infrastructure if there's only 50 people. But as that city grows to houses, well, guess what happens with that infrastructure? It's not enough. It's the same concept with an organization: is what systems do we have in place? Strategic planning, risk management, portfolio management, the way we manage projects. So you need both of them to help leaders motivate, inspire people, but you need systems to help them guide and be more efficient.
When we have somebody who kind of bulldozes the work and gets the work done without the empathetic leadership and emotional intelligence, that's a problem. And we have someone who is all touchy-feely and does, everything right from a people perspective, but doesn't get results. That's a problem. So you're right. The true intersection of where those connect is what really moves a company forward. One of the biggest challenges for employees and leaders in the workplace is when things get tough, when it's a high stress environment, high pressure, and it's harder for them to manage their emotions. What advice do you have for individuals or leaders in the workplace who need to keep their emotions in check when the going gets tough?
It's super important. I will tell you that in the absence of managing or regulating your emotions, you can risk burnout. You can risk anxiety. You can risk so many other issues because, it's consuming us. We're allowing it to consume us. And so I think being aware of your emotions, there's a saying where don't say I'm angry. I should say I feel angry. Don't let it define you. It's a feeling that you have. And it's not about suppressing your emotions. It's recognizing it, knowing what it is, and then regulate it. Somebody gave me, I was listening to this podcast called Hidden Brain. And the example that it gave is like an emotion's coming into your brain, knocks on your door. It's anger. Let it come into your lobby, acknowledge it, but don't let it come into your house. Let it go back out. So that's where you start to regulate because you're pausing.
Yeah.
Pausing to say, here's my emotion. I'm going to choose not to take over. Now, do we always want to leave that emotion out the door? No. If there's something if somebody passes away in my family and I'm going to get emotional, I want to cry. We need to cry. You just want to be mindful which emotions are you allowing into your house, into your brain that are appropriate. And sometimes we need time to regulate because that's the hardest part of emotional intelligence is emotional regulation. That is the hardest one, right? We talked about pausing. Talk about breathing. There's the breathing box. There's walking. There's different mindfulness, yoga, meditation, all those things. The common denominator is time to slow down. And one of the ones we haven't talked about, Mindy, that's probably if there was only one strategy that anybody takes away today is getting a healthy sleep hygiene. Because if we're not resting, we are easily triggered and we are on fast brain. We're now on fight or flight just by default.
Yes.
So we're moody, we're, defensive. And this is where the burnout comes out because our fast brain is constantly on and we haven't rested. And I'll share one story with you where even sleep really played a role in my safety. April of 2024, I was in Orlando for a whole week from Sunday to Thursday. A colleague of mine said, we're going to meet a client in Atlanta, Georgia. I said, okay. They said, don't get a rental because it's only one day. Go ahead and get an Uber. Okay. So they were already there. I get to the airport. It's about 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. I typically have never taken an Uber there. And so I asked the lady, where's your Uber? She said, it's by the parking garage. So I walked to the parking garage at the Atlanta airport. And I have my suitcases. Mind you, I'm tired. And there's a gentleman there with the Uber phone, right? It's an Uber Lyft on it. He said, ma'am, you need a ride? I said, yes. And he pulls up the Uber app and he says, where are you going? I said, I'm going to the Marriott. So he said, okay, here it is. It's $100. I said, that's about right. So I follow him to his car. We have a great conversation about leadership in his vehicle. The vehicle's nice. We get to the Marriott. He gets my luggage. And I said, thank you so much. I said, I'll go ahead and tip you on the Uber app. And then he says, I'm not an Uber driver.
Oh my gosh. You must have. Yeah, I would paralyze like, well, okay.
I was so disappointed in myself, Mindy. So disappointed in myself. I'm like, oh my God. He gave me his cash app. I just wanted to pay him and go. So I paid him, went inside, and I was just angry and disappointed in myself. Oh my gosh, what have I done? I just got into a complete stranger's vehicle in a totally city outside home.
Where no one knew you.
You know what happened? Yeah, you know what I did wrong? Because I was so tired and I was so exhausted that I had a lapse of judgment and I should have had my Uber app open, not his. I should have had my own and booked it.
Yes.
It didn't connect. I was so exhausted. I'm very fortunate to be here today to tell this story. And I'm very disappointed in myself, but you know what? It's a story that I can share with others on. Even when I'm practicing emotional intelligence, if we don't rest, our judgment lapses. And that's exactly what happened to me. And I'm grateful that it was turned out relatively well considering, but that's what happened.
I'm glad that had a happy ending. And I can relate when you're training, even when you're just traveling and sitting in a training all week, it's exhausting, right? And you're disoriented, not sleeping in your own bed. And so that had to be so incredibly scary. And I think about sleep often as it relates to how I show up. And I think it took me years to figure out how important it is.
And some of the feedback I get, Mindy, from when I say that, the 7 to 9 hours, people say, I don't have time for that. I'll sleep when I die.
Mm,
Research suggests you're going to die sooner.
yeah.
People that don't get their sleep in
Mhm.
tend to have shorter lifespans according to the research. So it's that important. That's why, at least for today, for this podcast, one of the key takeaways, get your 7 to 9 hours of sleep. I understand once in a while, it's not everything, but as long as you're on the average, you're sleeping 7 to 9 hours, that to me will help you just be more present,
Yeah.
and your emotional intelligence would be more enhanced because of that.
I mean, when you're tired, your brain isn't functioning on all cylinders. And so if the whole point of emotional intelligence is to pause and to put your emotions in check, it's harder and harder to do that if you aren't well rested. So, Bonnie, for organizations that want to start implementing and encouraging emotional intelligence in their organization, where would you recommend they start?
I believe and I recommend that they should partner with a trusted partner that can help them have a strategy. I think
Mhm.
it's that important to understand, how do we develop emotional intelligence for the entire organization,
Mhm.
and really thinking about, okay, what's the end goal? And then how do we roll this out in the organization? So being very thoughtful and having a trusted partner is key, because it does
Mhm.
take time. It's not a one and done. It's
Mm.
being able to establish those definitions, because they're difficult. And then
Yeah.
how do you sustain it over time? And so how do you integrate emotional intelligence and awareness on a regular basis versus just having a training and check it off and then I'm done to be a
Hmm. Hmm. And so, how do you advise them to embed it into their culture? So, obviously, I think it's good to start with somebody who can train the organization and be their guide. What does it look like when it is embedded into a culture, and how do companies get there?
Yeah. So I think the ideal approach is for leadership, the C-suite, to first really understand what it is, because they're going to
Hmm.
own it.
Hmm.
Ultimately, you want ownership from the upper leadership, because they have to model the way. They have to model the behaviors if you want it to sustain in the organization. So really, the investment has to start there, and it
Hmm.
has to be solid for it to be sustainable in a sense of ownership and understanding. Then you want to be able to cascade it to your managers of people, whether it be supervisors, directors, and then be deliberate on the timing that you cascade it, because you want to have enough time in day for each of the layers to comprehend and implement it.
Yeah.
Versus just doing a push, let's get it all done. It's to
Hmm.
be meaningful and impactful, so people are practicing on a regular basis. And then be able to sustain it. You have one-off workshops throughout the year with
Okay.
different scenarios that are relatable to the organization.
I love that idea, and of like continuing to offer scenarios and talk it through so that people can level set what it looks like and figure out like how to use it within the organization. So what do you recommend someone do when they know that their employee has been trained on emotional intelligence and they're really still struggling with it? What does that look like? When do you move to accountability, I think? And then the other thing is, would you say to a leader whose organization has not adopted emotional intelligence through the whole organization? How can they implement it on their team?
It's a very real scenario, Mindy, where I have observed firsthand where
Mhm.
the investment is made in leaders because they see the potential, right? If that investment is made from training and coaching on emotional intelligence and the behaviors are still not manifesting accordingly, and you've exhausted working with the coach and trying to have different conversations, you may be at a crossroads where
Mhm.
the conversation is now going to have to shift, because the number one thing on emotional intelligence as we started was self-awareness.
Mhm.
If you can't, if they are not self-aware, you can't pass go, you can't collect $200,
Right.
nothing else matters.
Right.
Regulation doesn't matter. The social,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter if the awareness is not there. And usually that's really the issue, when they're not, displaying those appropriate behaviors. And so when that happens, you have this very difficult conversation with the person. Hopefully, it's not the first time they hear it. I hope that I will say that you're having these conversations as you go along and you're progressing or not progressing. So it's not a surprise. But
Mhm.
at some point, if there is no progress or behaviors, the conversation is going to be escalate into here are our paths forward, right?
Yeah.
If we don't see these behaviors going forward, we may have to take different measures. So if you have to have a crucial conversation at this point. If we don't, and if we just check the box that they did it, we're doing a disservice as an organization. The leader's doing a disservice to the individual. And it's just really setting up everyone for success, for failure, because even the team around them also have the implications of that. So we have ownership of managing that conversation sooner than later. And I say this, time is of essence, Mindy. As a former, when I reflect back to where I was not as mature, I let something go for a year before I addressed a crucial conversation. Guess what? I did a disservice to my organization, to the person and my team members, because I didn't address it in a timely fashion. And they had the potential. But after we exhaust our efforts, then we have to make a decision or a path forward.
And I think it's hard because people might say, gosh, this is just who I am, right? This is who I am. I am somebody who is excitable. I am somebody who has a hard time managing my emotions. But when it comes to showing up at work, it's very important that someone can be aware of how they show up and the effect it has on others, right? And that self-awareness part is so key. So on the flip side of that, I want to ask you, so let's say someone's listening to this podcast and their organization as a whole has not provided training on emotional intelligence or really fostered that in the culture of the organization. So without that, I guess, support or nourishing of emotional intelligence training organization-wide, how can someone who's listening, whether they're an individual or a leader in the organization, how can they apply and grow their own emotional intelligence?
Love that. I think the leaders, I'll start first with the leaders. The leaders don't have to wait until they get training. Let's take the initiative and understand what it is. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of free training that you can take. You can ask your organization as well, but don't wait. Don't be dependent on it. My recommendation is to go learn and teach yourself and learn to build that muscle so that you can start displaying that. I think that would be number one. And guess what? When you show up and you become effective over time, it's a muscle. Your team will feel it. Because you're modeling those behaviors, people will emulate a lot of those behaviors. So it can be contagious, number one. From an individual perspective, individual contributor, as I mentioned for my dissertation research, right? When followers themselves, individual contributors, have a high EQ, their self-efficacy is going to be higher. They're not going to be as dependent on the maturity of the leader for them to feel that they're valued, right? Because your confidence is high enough that you can navigate through the different maturities. So if you're an individual contributor, do the same thing. Invest in your emotional intelligence, practice scenarios. I think scripts. One of the tools I use a lot to help me is with language is ChatGPT, right? The free version is, if I say something, I said, help me write this in a warm, approachable way. I get better just because I start to use similar language, and the way I use my words, ask questions, become more approachable, really helps me to be more effective in the way that I show up.
Are there any specific books or podcasts or tools that you would recommend to people to learn about their personal emotional intelligence?
I do. There's a book called The Emotional Intelligence 2.0 by Dr. Bradbury. And in it, it's very fundamental, which I love. I think it's great for everyone. But in the book, Mindy, in the middle part, there's 4 gray, I have it right here, by the way, right? There's 4 tabs, and every one of those tabs are actual strategies for self-awareness, strategies for self-regulation, strategies for social awareness, and strategies for the relationship building. So it's a very practical, pragmatic book that I recommend.
I love that. I'm going to get that as well. And I will make sure to list it in the show notes. So if people want to learn about this book, it will be listed in the show notes with the title and the author. That looks like a great recommendation. So Mindy, we talk about emotional intelligence in leadership. And one of the things I'm curious about is, how does emotional intelligence affect decision-making at the leadership level?
When we are regulating our emotions and we're hearing something that we don't agree with, or it's contradictory to what we propose, or we don't like the idea, if we are in fast brain, right? We get defensive, we cut people off, you can see it in our faces. So it doesn't really play well in terms of, being receptive or having a growth mindset and being curious. Like maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe I should try it, right? We get into this fixed mindset of it's my way or the highway. So emotional intelligence is really about having a growth mindset, being curious. I think the word curious is really the undercurrent here, that we should always be hoping to understand a different perspective outside of our own. And sometimes that's hard, right? We have our own biases and our own filters, but we also have to respect and appreciate diversity of thought. And so really pausing and understanding, I wonder why wonder how they got to that conclusion. Can you tell me more?
So, Mindy, in this day, we are still living in many hybrid and remote workplaces. There's so many different types of work environments. And I'd love to get your perspective on how people can navigate emotional intelligence when we're limited on face-to-face interactions.
So this is a really important one, because when we talk about environment, right, we're talking about the social aspect. Are we taking the cues? How are we observing? What are the norms in this particular environment, and how do we adapt, right? So first building awareness around where we're at, and then how do I adapt to be effective, right? That's key. The reason why I point this out, Mindy, many times I have been questioned or challenged in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Mindy, you're asking me to be professional, but I'm going to lose my authenticity, right? I mean, that's a question I get, especially from the newer generation. Fair question, right?
Right.
But here's the thing, Mindy. I think there's confusion between professionalism and authenticity. And I'll give you an example of what that may look like. So, for example, when we go to a library nowadays, or maybe back in the day, the expected norm is that we're quiet, respectful, because people are studying, right?
Right.
We're adapting to that environment.
Yeah.
We're not losing our authenticity when we walk into the library. We're adapting to the environment. Same is true when we go to a funeral or celebration of life, right? We go in there, we assess, and then we adapt. Sometimes celebrations of life are exciting. Sometimes people are mourning. So we assess and then we adapt, correct? I think we can agree.
Yeah.
Those are relatively obvious environments. But the same holds true in our virtual environments or in our workplace environments. We have to understand what are the expected norms and how do we adapt. You're not sacrificing your authenticity. We're trying to be effective. You can still bring your authentic self, but there are norms that are expected. And we do them every day. We just don't realize it.
Right.
So having that clarity of understanding, when I'm on virtual, what are the expected norms and how are we as leaders communicating early and often on the managing expectations versus hoping, I hope they turn their camera on.
Yes.
So
yes.
Yeah, we want to communicate expectations and why it's important, right? That the next best thing to in person is I need to see you, right? We need to see each other.
Right.
And then, is there going to be times we don't need our cameras? Yes. But the majority of the time, how do we promote that we need to communicate this way so that we don't have to get to a place we disconnect so much that we got to go back to the office?
Yeah.
So it's something that we have to nurture and manage very carefully, because there's a lot of benefits of doing virtual, right? Older, seasoned employee at 55 years old, when we first had COVID, I struggled for 6 months to adapt to virtual because I was high touch.
Yeah.
Guess what? Now I love it.
Yes.
Adapted.
Yes.
I appreciate it. I love having best of both worlds. So it's really making sure that we're able to understand the environment, communicate it, and then adapt for effectiveness. That's kind of the key.
I really love how you talked about that, because so many people, I work with both job seekers and companies, and so many people really want a remote environment. And so I think it's important to say almost the ticket to entry of getting that and keeping that is to be adaptable to the culture, turn your camera on, use emotional intelligence, make sure you're connecting with your employees and your supervisor and everyone enough so that they don't miss you being in the office, right? And you're actually adapting in a way that you can show up just as strongly no matter where your desk is. Right?
Absolutely. The win-win situation.
Yeah, for sure. So my last question for you, Madi, is about job seekers. As you know, I help job seekers get hired, and emotional intelligence is such an important skill for anyone in the workplace. But when I talk to my job seekers, what advice would you tell me to give them about understanding and utilizing emotional intelligence to get hired?
The first thing I would say, due diligence. Do your homework. You have to be able to connect with these individuals without you even first meeting them. So really do your research on the organization. And if you know, and sometimes you don't know, the individual themselves, right? How do you do your homework? I call it forensics.
Yeah.
So that you know more information about them, because in the end, there's a theory called the relationship theory, where there's how are we enhancing our relationship from stranger acquaintance to mature, and how we do that. And that's exactly what a interview is most of the time, right?
Yeah.
In a stranger phase, you're trying to move to acquaintance phase. And if you do your due diligence before that, you're already ahead of the game, because it's about building trust and connection with the people you're interviewing. So making sure you know enough about the company, the person you're talking to, the extent that you can, and making connections with them. This is where your emotional intelligence comes in. How are you connecting with those people deliberately still being professional and being authentic to yourself? That to me is probably one of the biggest takeaways. It's not about having the perfect interview. It's them feeling that you're showing up as yourself and you're doing your best. You put the effort and the homework. That goes a long way than answering everything perfectly.
I could not agree more. I have interviewed thousands and thousands of people. And when I interview someone, you can tell if they're bringing their authentic self, and you can tell if they have done their homework on the company. And so I love seeing you support that, because that is truly what is going to make a candidate stand out. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. This has been truly enlightening to me, and I know it will be to my listeners as well. So thank you so much. Well, that was an insightful conversation with Dr. Weymouth, and I hope it showed you that emotional intelligence is not just a buzzword. It's actually a game changer for leadership, communication, and personal success. From both self-awareness to managing emotions when we're under pressure, today's discussion gave us a roadmap for using emotional intelligence to level up at both work and in our life. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review, subscribe, and share it with a friend. If you would like to contact Dr. Weymouth, you can find her at www.peoplewhisperers.com. I'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well. Thank you for joining us today, and I'll see you in the next episode.